Welcome and great to have you join us as we go off script with Sam Monk, Senior Leader of Equippers Church. Enjoy today's podcast.
Hey, welcome to episode 10 of Off Script with Sam Monk. Great to be with you. We're talking about leadership lessons, what's worked and what hasn't. And Sam, I've got a good question for you because we are living in, I guess, pretty uncertain times, turbulent times, stormy seas.
That's one way to describe it.
I'm trying to think of these evocative images of turbulence and chaos, but there's a lot of uncertainty around, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. And Sam, you're human, right?
Yeah.
You're not a robot. So you got to feel stuff, and you're leading a pretty significant organization in the midst of pretty uncertain times. And I kind of want you to open up how you feel about this stuff. Like, what are the things that you go through in your own mind? Because at the end of the day, you've got to go home. You think about things, I'm sure, at night times. You know, I'm sure you have your moments where you think, gosh, how am I going to navigate through this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, talk about that, because it'd be cool for people to hear how you navigate these things.
Yeah, I reckon it's been a challenge for everybody in the season. It's like all your best plans have been thrown out the window and you're having to think about things differently. Definitely, it's a challenge, and I like to view it as a challenge because the moment you see it as a burden, you come under it. Whereas when you see it as a challenge, it means that it's something that you can get on top of and you can progress. But yeah, no doubt, you know, there's, what's happening? What's going on? I need some clarity. And I think within each and every one of us, there's this need for clarity. And a leader's role is to bring clarity. And it's hard to bring clarity when you got no clarity yourself.
Because you get asked the question a lot, don't you? Hey, Sam, what's the plan? Like, what's our plan here? What are we going to do here? What are we going to do here? But you're also working in an environment where there, even macro government-wise, there's not often a plan. There's a lot, again, the uncertainty is everywhere. It's not just within our context. So what do you say to someone when they say to you, hey, what's the plan? What are we doing? I need to know.
First of all, I take heart from God knows the end from the beginning. And, serving God is really helpful in this season and being close to God because he knows what's going on. He knows what's going to happen next week, next year, and in the next decade. And, just taking comfort in the fact that he has a plan. And he has a plan in this season, and he's working. He's not asleep. I think I take great comfort in that. And so, my discipline in this season has been to take the words of Paul is to set my mind on things that are above. And it's amazing when you lift your eyes from what's in front of you and you look up and you look to God. It's then and there you get clarity.
So so talk about that clarity, because say you're faced with a lot of situations. Church for a long time has been unable to meet in person. I know different places around the world have had different opening up times and that kind of thing. You're faced with a whole bunch of things. You're being asked a whole bunch of questions from people who want clarity. You're not always able to give it. So what's a way that you would orient your thinking? Like when you go away home by yourself and you're sitting there and you're planning and you're praying, like how do you respond to these things, and how do you maybe orient your thinking? Like what do you ask yourselves?
Yeah, because there's been changes to the programs, and I think,
and in the midst of it, you've still continued to plan. Like you haven't stopped planning because we've got to keep planning. Yeah, you know what I mean. You've still kept saying, well, we still have. You can't do nothing. Yeah, just sit back and wait for something to happen. Like you've not waited. You've kept putting plans in place.
Yeah, well, I think. Making sure all our programs are serving a bigger purpose is really important. So many people can get just so tunnel visioned where they get locked and they can't see outside of their program. And so what's the bigger purpose and what are you trying to accomplish? We haven't been able to do Sunday services and corporate gatherings, but what's the purpose of that gathering? And can we achieve that purpose through a different mechanism? It may not be to the same degree, but how do we still extract the benefit out of that program and maybe repackage it so people are still engaging with the benefit of what church is? And I think that's really critical. So, in terms of orientating my thoughts, I've just asked myself 5 questions. In fact, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote down 5 questions I want to ask myself to create a little bit of a filter as to how we should respond and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And so those 5 questions are really simple. Right at the start, number 1 is what I'm doing inspirational?
Great.
I think that's really important because we need to inspire people. In this pandemic, many people just retreat and say, hey, we'll just wait till the storm passes and then we'll go back to normal. But I believe that, this season actually provides us with the opportunity to innovate. And, we've got to work on something that's uncomfortably exciting. I think the founder of Google first said that. He said, always work on something that's uncomfortably exciting. And that stirs your creative juices. That gets, is it inspirational? Because if I'm not inspired by it, the chances are other people aren't going to be inspired by it.
True.
And inspiration brings in energy, it brings life. And so the first thing is it inspirational? Which brings me to the second thing is I ask myself, is it sustainable? Is it sustainable? How many know you can have good ideas, but there's difference between good ideas and God ideas, and a lot of people have good ideas that are good today but they don't last. And I think there's a danger of in the season, in uncertainty, is that we're going, we're 1 minute taking the whole group of people over here, and then we're changing their mind and we're taking them over there.
People get exhausted with that. Like, where are we going today? We're going over here, we're doing this, we're doing that. You can only have so many ideas and take people in so many places before maybe you lose some of that relational equity, and people are like, it's chaotic,
So is this sustainable? Is this something that we can outwork in the long term? One thing we, just from a mindset thing, we said instead of filling buildings because we couldn't meet in buildings, we're going, well, the purpose of church is to multiply ministry.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
But how many know if we're multiplying ministry, when we get to be able to meet together, filling the building won't be a problem because ministry has been multiplied during the season.
Because you're right, if filling buildings or whatever people work in, if that's the only one thing that they do and that's then taken away, people are thinking, gosh, what am I getting paid for? What am I actually, and you're right, that can't be the goal, can it? That's a byproduct of other things that we should be probably doing already.
Yeah, well, from a leadership, my responsibility isn't just a perspective for the church, my responsibility is not just to preach on Sunday, to be a talking head. The role of a New Testament minister is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So ministry is multiplied, and sadly in a lot of places in the church, we've got 1 or 2 people doing the ministry rather than a group doing the ministry. And so, it's changing that focus. There's one thing about having a good idea, but is it sustainable, which, is really important. Which then brings me to the third question. The third question is it relational? And I found anything that God does is relational. And so number 1 is what I'm involved in. Is it inspiring? Is it sustainable? But is it helping me grow in my relationship with God? And then also, am I deepening the relationships I have with others around me, with the people around me? Because, that is how God builds. In fact, God builds 3 ways. He builds relationally, He builds revelationally, and He builds generationally. And the other 3 ways that God builds, anything that He builds, is through revelation, through relationship, and through the generations. And, in the end, if it's not enhancing relationships, the question is it lasting?
Yeah. I love the question we ask in our staff reviews. It's still probably the most fascinating question is your love for God and others increasing as a result of what you do? And I think it's a cracking question because there are times where people go, no, I'm actually, and maybe people have, lost sight of what they do, or they're being overwhelmed by things, or it's getting hard, and maybe you've lost relationship, and you've got to, what do we say if you lose relationship? You've got to result back to kind of law, or you've got to result to, these are the terms of the contract, as opposed to, well, actually relationally there's a lot we can get done, isn't there? As opposed to having to go back to kind of like, well, you said this and I said that, and
well, there's it lacks the heart. It lacks heart. You got the behavior, but it's not flowing from your heart. And that's where the relational side of things is so critical, which then brings me to the 4th question. Is it transferable? Is it scalable? So often we're looking for, the killer idea.
The one idea that's going to change everything.
I need the killer idea. Just give me the killer idea. But, so often we look for the idea, and the idea then becomes complex. and it becomes hard. The genius of Jesus is that he took complex things like the law and the prophets and he summarized them in simple statements.
Right.
And I think the genius of leadership is to be able to take complexity and make it really simple, so then it's scalable and transferable. And, you know, I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. And so what's something that people can grab hold of and then pass it on to somebody else?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Because again, I like that thought that if people can't see it, they can't engage with it.
Yeah.
And you're trying to create in leadership, aren't you? You're trying to create a picture that people can see. Like, can you take a hold of this? Is this? And I love the thought of scalability, because if we need to scale. You know, the church needs to scale. If we don't have a small church or whatever people are doing, God doesn't give us small dreams, right? He's not a small God.
Yeah.
And so scale is really important, isn't it? We can't just simply hunker down and have our kind of tiny little thing and expect that to be there forever. But I think the scalability is really important, and we've got to be able to see something so that other people can engage with it. And as a leader, we've got to do that, right?
Yeah.
Got to be inspirational. We've got to paint a picture that, I know when you recruited me many years ago, but we had this conversation again, we were in London and again, talking around food, and we're having one of these very off script kind of conversations, and you were telling me some of the numbers. Oh, you'd be leading teams of the size, and you'd be that. And I remember thinking, gosh, that's quite big. But there was a part of me that thought, oh, that's quite exciting too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay, that happy, scared kind of place.
Yeah, and that's where that inspirational side is so critical.
Yeah.
But then also the scale is like, can individuals own what you're sharing as their own?
Right.
You know, it's like, man, I can grab hold of this, I can integrate it into my life, and I can see how this could be beneficial for others. And I think that's the power of the gospel. The power of the gospel is if it's touched my life, you know, and out of that, you know, I can then share it with the others. Is it transferable? Because if there's just one or two of us spreading this, you know, we may multiply, but we'll never see the exponential growth that we desire to see. And so scalable is big, because anything in the kingdom, if it's kingdom principle, it multiplies. It has a multiplication, exponential aspect to it. Which brings me to the last question I ask myself is it transformational? Because in the end, we don't want to just run a whole lot of activity and not see lives change, which, you know, as the old adage goes, changed lives change lives. And, you know, ultimately we want to see lives transformed. And if a life's been transformed, then it becomes, that in itself is the transformational nature. And that transfers into the lives of others. And
the transformation is important, especially a heart transformation, because we can, you know, we often talk about, we're not into behavior modification for people, are we? We're not into trying to, you know, oh, if you could just do this differently, if you could do that differently. But actually, when a heart's been transformed by Jesus, like, everything changes.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things you don't need to focus on when hearts have been transformed,
Yeah.
And I think the same thing when an idea is transformational.
Yeah.
Everybody in the room should go, yes, this is the thing. This is, and especially again, we're talking about this in the context of pretty turbulent times and uncertainty. Like, transformation is key. We have to transform, don't we? We've got to change the way we think. We can't do things the way that we used to do them. The whole environment's changed.
Well, it comes from that foundational belief that God is working.
Yeah.
And he's not on pause. He isn't asleep. He's not checked out during the season. And many people can check out. But I believe, you know, in fact, in the Bible, if you look at the Bible, the harsher the conditions, was a recipe for greater outcomes. The harsher the conditions Pharaoh put on the Egyptians, the more they increased.
Yeah, right.
And persecution in the early church, you know, it was like limitation around their life, scattered. But as a result of that, the church went into areas it may not have never gone into if it wasn't for the persecution.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the first adjustments is actually thanking God for the opportunities that we have in this season, because there's an opportunity in every obstacle. The danger is we just see the obstacle and we don't recognize the opportunity. And I believe there's an opportunity for great ministry
Yeah.
You know, it's like what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16:9 says there's an opportunity for a great work here. A great work. There's a wide open door, should I say, for a great work here, even though many oppose me.
Yeah.
And I really believe there's an opportunity for businesses, for individuals, for the church to really progress during the season.
And just a final comment. I love that thought that you and I heard many years ago when someone said it to us, that actually we're really here to kind of, to point the way, to clear the path and point the way, clear the path?
Yeah.
Yeah, point the way and clear the path. And that brings that kind of simplicity, doesn't it? Like, we're actually saying this is where we're going, and we're going to try and remove as many obstacles as we can, especially, again, in uncertain times. It's nice to be able to say this is where we're going, and let's try and remove all the barriers so that we can get there, right?
Yeah, and just creating filters for yourself. So the My 5, is it inspirational? Is the first one, is it sustainable? Is it relational? The fourth one is it, and I'm going to get
scalable.
It's transferable, scalable, and is it transformational? And the 5 things that.
Great. Now, great filters and great things to think about. Again, in the midst of uncertainty, great filters to hopefully help you. And again, if this has been useful, please continue to share this podcast, continue to subscribe on all the different channels that we're on as well. And we pray this has been useful to you today. And we'll see you next week for Off Script with Sam Monk.
Thanks for listening to Off Script with Sam Monk. If you found this podcast helpful, make sure you pass it on. We love your feedback, so drop us a line about what topics you'd like to hear about on Off Script with Sam Monk.